Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's Wednesday, and I decided I really, before the end of the year, have to get down the tags I didn't do in which I was tagged. So I decided to do an old one, the My Pleasure tag, originally done by Steve Partridge, and he tagged me in his original tag video, and this was so long ago that Steve, who had a wonderful booktube channel, disappeared into the void. He is not making videos anymore. So, but I still like the tag, and I thought, well, you know, you get the tag lagging behind thing going, and start with a really old one. They had seven questions or prompts in total, and they all have to do with the pleasure of reading, hence my pleasure tag. And the first one is Think, a book that made you think hard. I a lot of books made me think hard, but of course, for a tag, you have to pick one, and so I picked this one, Gitta Sereni, Into That Darkness, first published in 1974. Gitta Sereni died 2012, I think. She was born 1920. She was a historian, biographer, non-fiction writer. She's from Hungarian Austrian descent, and she fled from Austria in the late 1930s to Switzerland, and from there to Paris and to London, where she then lived. This book is about the Holocaust. Gitta Sereni interviewed one of the four Nazi commanders who commanded death camps. And this one is Franz Stangl. He was the commander of Treblinka. And after the Second World War, he was tried and convicted to life imprisonment because of his responsibility for almost 1 million murders. Gitta Sereni interviewed Franz Stangl in prison in the early 1970s multiple times, and then she also did her own research about him and about Treblinka, but also about the 1930s. And what came out was this, a portrait, if you might call it that, of Franz Stangl. It's not an easy read, I will warn you, but when I think of this prompt, a book that made you think hard, is the way Gitta Sereni is able to give a portrait of this man, also including his self-portrait, what he thinks about himself, whether he thinks he did something bad, and if so, how did he develop from a normal, quote-unquote, young German man into the Nazi commander of Treblinka. I think it's certainly one of the best books that tries to come to grips with people responsible for Holocaust murders, and I can highly recommend this book. The second prompt is Love, a book that broke or mended your heart. And for this one, and those of you who are following my channel, you've heard about this book many times. I picked Mary Doria Russell's book, The Sparrow, first published in 1996. Mary Doria Russell is an American writer. She was born in 1950. She is a paleoanthropologist. She wrote about cannibalism, stuff like that, gory stuff. But she also published a couple of novels. This is a science fiction novel because it's set in the future, 2059, and we learn about the hardships encountered by a Jesuit scientist explorer team that went from Earth to a faraway planet called Rakat, and they encountered the population there, and then things go really, really badly wrong. The main character, the Jesuit priest Emilio Sanchez, comes back. That's when the book opens, when he comes back to Earth, and he is severely injured. He has what we now would call post-traumatic stress disorder because of what happened there to him and to his team members of this expedition. And it's a beautiful, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching book about, to quote another book title, The Clash of Civilizations and what can happen if you don't understand another culture. If you're into the more deep thinking sci-fi novels that explore themes like religion, but especially cultural differences, and what it means to have a certain culture and the misunderstandings that occur when another culture comes in and anyway, it broke my heart. I hardly ever cry when I read, but this certainly made me tear up a couple of times. But it also mended my heart in a way because it's so beautiful. So if you've never heard of this book, if you've never read this book, please do. And I promise at some point I will stop holding up this book into the camera. The third prompt is eat. A book that nourishes you. It's sort of an eat, pray, love kind of tag. Anyway, I'm digressing. And for this prompt, I picked Edith Wharton's 1920 novel, The Age of Innocence. The book, Edith Wharton, I don't need to tell you about her, but the book is set in New York's golden age, the late 1870s, and we follow our main character, Newland Archer. He is a member of the high society, rich. He's a lawyer, but he doesn't have to work really very much, and he's engaged to a beautiful young woman, and then he meets Countess Ellen Olenska, who is from a good family, but she had a disastrous marriage to a Polish man. She lived in Europe, and then she left her husband and she came back to New York when the book opens, and Newland Archer falls in love with her, and we follow the story of their relationship. Whether or not they will have a relationship, I will leave open for those of you who haven't read the book, and way into the 20th century. So the book spans quite some time. And why I picked this for a book that nourishes me is because of the language. I thought the writing, the language was so beautiful that I really had, when I read the book, I think I read it this year together with Olive from a book Olive as a buddy read, that you really feel enriched because of the language. I mean, the story is maybe not even that special. It's about love and about society and about the perception of people of themselves and of other people and the expectation that society has of you. That's very interesting, and I really like the story, but why this book is so dear to my heart is because of the writing. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. Moving on to prompt number 4, Laughter, a book that brought you a little comic relief. And for this prompt, I picked a book by one of my favorite authors, Lionel Shriver, her 2010 novel, So Much for That. Lionel Shriver is an American author, partly living in the UK and partly living in America. She's, I think, most famous for her book, We Need to Talk About Kevin. But this one, So Much for That, so far has been my favorite book by her. The book is set in the United States, and we follow our main character, Shep Necker, a middle-aged man, married with a daughter, and Shep Necker has worked his whole life in a job he doesn't like, and always dreaming of saving enough money to buy a little house somewhere in a country where it's cheap. His wife Glenys knows about this dream, but has always been able to postpone it. But when the book opens, Shep has saved, I think, about $250,000 or something, and he decided now is the time. I found an island off the coast of Tanzania. Life is cheap there. We can live off the savings for the rest of our lives. And he is about to tell his wife Glenys that he will go with or without her, when it turns out that Glenys has something to tell him as well. And what she tells him is that she has just been diagnosed with a rare and very vicious form of cancer. The book then follows, of course, Shep doesn't go then to the island. His wife's pursuit of medical care. So it's a book about illness, but it's also mainly a book about the American healthcare system. Shep's best friend has there's the comic relief, but I'm not going to tell you, has medical problems of his own. Then you have the daughter who has also a terminal illness. And what I really love about this book is the fact that it's a serious subject, and you learn a lot, and it makes you think about healthcare and whether you should, spend a lot of money on something that will prolong your life maybe for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, but it's also hilariously funny. And this combination of a serious subject with a comic relief makes this one of my favorite Lionel Shriver novels. And of course, it's the My Pleasure tag. And if you know Steve Partridge from back then, the next prompt is Sex, a book that explores or contains sexuality that didn't make you cringe. I thought this was the hardest prompt because I have so far to read a book with a sex scene that doesn't make me cringe. So I had to think really hard and long which book to pick, and I chose this one, Radcliffe Hall, The Well of Loneliness, published in 1928. And no, there are no sex scenes really in this book, but it explores at least sexuality, lesbian love. The main character, Stephen Gordon, a young woman from a wealthy family. She's shunned by society because she fences and she writes and she rides. I mean, not write, but rides. So she is boyish. The name is already boyish, Stephen Gordon. And then she meets a woman, Mary, and they fall in love. And then the book is about the question whether they can have a relationship, a love and sexual relationship, despite all the prejudices. It's not quite fitting the prompt, I admit it, but it's a beautiful book. It's one of the first books in-depth exploring a lesbian relationship. I think it was even banned, even though, if I remember correctly, there's only a kiss that is really described in the book. So nothing that would shock us in the 21st century, but back then in 1928, it was obviously shocking that you would write about lesbian relationship at all. I think it's beautiful, and it's the only one I could come up with that sort of kind of fits this prompt. Prompt number 6, Rest, a book that gave you peace or rest or just calms you down. And if I need calming down or peacefulness or something, what I then read, and you're probably gonna laugh very hard, is journals, diaries, whether it's Virginia Woolf's diaries or Susan Sontag's diaries. That to read this flow of daily pursuits that calms me down. So I have quite some books to pick from, and I picked this one, the journals of Sylvia Plath, quite a junker. They are unabridged journals from Sylvia Plath, Short Life. But I might as well have picked, Susan Sontag's journals. I think I have them here as well. A Consciousness is Harnessed to Flesh. It's one of the volumes of her journals. But let's stick with Sylvia Plath. It's the way a journal is written. Like I said, this sort of continuation, this flow of daily activities that really soothes me and calms me down. What can you do? I'm weird. And then we are down to the last prompt, number 7, experience. a book that introduced you to a new subject or changed your perspective. And for this prompt, I picked Passing by Nella Larsen, first published in 1929. Nella Larsen was an American writer. She was born in 1891 from a black father and a white Danish mother. Her father died when she was very young, 2 years old, I think, and in her childhood she lived mainly surrounded by white people. This book explores something stupid white woman that I am, I didn't know existed. Passing means black people whose skin is so light that they can pass for white. The book centers around two women, black women with light skin. One is even married to a white man who is quite the racist. The other one is married to a black man, but she still sometimes passes as white. For instance, she goes to a cafe where you would be frowned upon if you went there, being black in this time and age. And the two women, the relationship between the two women, the friendship, then develops into a story. The story is nicely written and interesting, but I picked this book because, like I said, stupid me, I had no idea that this existed. And it also made me think not only how horrible it is that people would be forced, to pass as white because otherwise they couldn't go into a cafe, but also what it means if you then, like the one woman in the book, you marry a white guy, and if you have children and their skin is not white, what will happen then? So this really made me think, but it mainly introduced me to a subject I had no knowledge of. So if you haven't read this book, and maybe if you are like me, you don't know anything, or maybe at least not a lot about this subject, I can certainly recommend it. It's also, the story, like I said, is also really interesting, but the subject of passing, I thought that was fascinating in a horrible way. Anyway, these were my picks for the 7 prompts. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. I would really like to tag people, but this tag has been so old and has been around for so long that probably you all done it. But if you haven't, any of you, Steve, Donahue, Mel, Jess, Simon from Savage Reads, Eric from The Lonesome Reader, Sean from Sean the Book Maniac, David from The Poptimist, Najwa from Najwa Reads. I can come up with at least 20 other names, but the video is too long already. But if you haven't done it, or if it has been a long time that you've done it, please do this tag. I thought it was really interesting to do. And I'll see you all soon in my next video. Bye bye.